Holodeck 3 program is reinstated.
Open sesame!
Commander Klingon vessel. We are energizing transport of evil. Now.
Engage!
Hello, welcome everyone to Star Trek from the Holodeck, the Lower Decks edition. I'm your host and captain, Michael Flores, and I'm flying the USS Rainman Digital into a nebula in order to make sure Khan cannot catch me. David, you and I went to go see the 35 millimeter screening.
Oh my god, dude, that brought a tear to my eye.
Of Star Trek Wrath of Khan, and we're gonna do our own little show on it eventually. But man, I can't stop thinking about it. Just seeing it on the big screen in its original format it's a thing of dreams.
It is, and it still packs a punch, you know, for the whole story, and even like some of the effects still stand up to this day.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know if you noticed when we were watching, I was flinching still at the conworm thing.
Oh yeah.
Even though like back then, the effects they used for the conworms are dated. They are dated. I mean, come on.
It's still effective though.
It's still effective.
It's no different than watching John Carpenter's The Thing. Those effects are dated, but dated doesn't mean it's not effective. It's still just as effective as the first time you watched it.
And the first time, just even to this day, watching the worm inch its way across Chekhov's face.
That sounds very homoerotic.
Yeah, going into his ear. Oh my God. I was like, ugh.
Yeah. When are we going to see a conworm joke in Lower Decks, I wonder? I'm surprised we haven't seen one yet, right?
I am waiting.
I mean, come on, Mike, but man, you ain't trying.
How do you make that funny, though, Mike? How do you make it funny?
Oh, you can make it funny.
I think that's what Mike McMahon would be screaming at us. It's like, how do you make that funny?
It's not that hard, Mike. Just think about it. All right? Come on. All right. So if you're new to our shows, you can find the podcast version of this broadcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Our preferred feeds are iTunes and Spotify. Also, if you're a YouTube type of person, you can catch our live video feeds on our network YouTube page, youtube.com/RainmanDigital. Be sure to click subscribe and give us a thumbs up. I will apologize now for the ugliness of my face that you may see. Please be kind and don't make fun of my face. Thank you. All right, David, how are you?
I'm doing okay, Mike.
All right. So we're desperately trying to catch up with some Lower Decks. We did take a little bit of a break, a hiatus. Normally we don't do these things, but this season we're kind of, or I should say this year, 2022, because there's so much content and it's almost nonstop with Star Trek, we have to just take breaks.
Yeah.
Because we also have lives. And for the most part, we do this for free. But that's why we rely on people to go to our Patreon page, right, David?
Yes.
So that we can justify giving up our lives. It's hours on end to talk about Star Trek.
It's for our Patreon members.
Yeah. More content. All right, David. So we're going to be talking about Lower Decks Season 3, Episode 5, titled Reflections. The Synapsis, Mariner, Boimler, and Tendi clashed with their arch rivals, Delta Shift. The Cerritos engineers go on mandatory relaxation. Wait, that's not it.
That's
not it. What is going on here?
I was like, wait a minute.
Maybe I have the wrong episode up. Hold on a second. Dave, this is what happens when we take breaks. Okay, here we go. I have the right one here. Mariner and Boimler work the Starfleet recruitment booth at an alien job fair.
There you go.
Rutherford challenges himself. I like this episode quite a bit. A little bit of a existential flair there, or existential vibe, because we're dealing with Rutherford and the dichotomy of his two sides.
Yes.
Which I think is pretty cool.
And you do it with the parallel of Boimler and Mariner's story, where they're trying to defend Federation to outdoor, how people perceive them outside.
Yeah.
And it's like, I really liked this is actually the first episode of the season where I basically go, this is arguably up there with one of my favorites.
It's one of the better episodes of the season.
Because I love what happens with Boimler. Boimler became my hero. He is my spirit animal.
Jesus.
He became my spirit animal in the end. But even with
he does get a lot of hot chicks, even though he doesn't actually seal the deal. He seems to have some hot chicks always throwing themselves at him.
And then you have the story of Rutherford, which that ending, I was like going, for Lower Decks, that was kind of dark to end it that way. And then you don't come up with an answer, and you kind of have that idea that we're going to see this come back for the Lower Decks crew in some way.
Yeah. Yeah, this episode did a few interesting things, most of which revolved around Rutherford. And I will, say this. This is our first Rutherford-centric episode of the season, which I find surprising since, they usually do what? Maybe 3, I want to say, Rutherford-centric episodes since the start of this show.
Yeah.
And the fact that we only have gotten 1 is surprising, but I'm not complaining. I'm just happy that we got it. And it was one of the better episodes of the season so far.
Mm-hmm.
His episodes are typically interesting. One of my favorite episodes still is from season 1, the Badgie episode.
I was about to say, the Badgie episode's still
just
the best.
Such a good episode. Another aspect of the Rutherford stuff that worked so well with this episode was the internal struggle between the different sides of Rutherford. I thought that was very philosophical. It was very much on par with what we have come to expect from Star Trek as Star Trek fans, right?
Yes, absolutely. Especially with the idea about the debate about Federation versus, what people might construe as reality. And it was really cool seeing the parallels between the two stories because Rutherford's side, it wasn't like his past self was a bad person. In fact, he was very talented, and he had a bit of an ego, but he was good at what he did.
Hey, listen, egos get a bag of rap nowadays. For some reason, everyone likes to criticize people that are confident. There's nothing wrong with a little bit of an ego, right? I mean, isn't that what Captain Kirk had?
And but the thing is that type of person didn't fit well with the Federation ideals. And that type of person doesn't fit well with the Federation ideals.
It does a little bit. Come on. Look, like I said, Captain Kirk.
Well, Captain Kirk can do anything, dude.
Yeah.
I mean, don't forget he cheated in his finals, and no one ever said, "Oh, you know what, you're expelled." No, they praised him for it.
He was oozing with ego and proud of himself in Star Trek 2 when him and Spock are talking in code.
Oh my God,
hours
yes.
will seem like days and minutes like hours, and you see this overconfidence in Captain Kirk's face. Come on.
Or no,
ego's always been a part of Star Trek.
Or even when he's talking to Khan and he tricks him. When he's he just looks, here comes Khan.
Yeah.
And then he just has this knowing look. And I'm going, Kirk, you cannot say that Kirk is the example of a person that doesn't belong in the Federation, because he's just one of the very special.
He's a rogue.
Rogues, that just gets away with murder.
No, come on. You're just being hyperbolic. I think he's a captain that represents they've almost kind of framed it that way now, right? In later iterations of Star Trek, that he was from a time that was almost like the Wild Wild West.
The Wild Wild West, yeah.
Yeah, where you shoot from the hip, essentially. So at the heart of this episode was a story revolving predominantly around Rutherford, at least the more interesting aspects of the episode. And the whole aspect of diving into this internal struggle between the two different sides of Rutherford, one prior to his accident and the one after his accident, that aspect was interesting because it brought back a story aspect from, I believe, season 1, and we never have gone back to it.
Yes.
If you remember, there was this almost this conspiracy that was being built around Rutherford's cybernetic enhancements, that there was something aloof and a mystery about how it happened and why it happened. And they have been leading us, for the most part, with this idea that there is a conspiracy. But then in season 2, I don't think we ever went back to it.
No.
So I do appreciate the fact that we have gone back into this conspiracy that's connected to Rutherford's implants. And I want to say, I think moving forward, I don't think we're going to get another episode this season about that, but I feel like eventually we're going to have to get these answers. Are there any theories out there yet, David, pertaining to this conspiracy? Because I saw a few popping up that were obvious, like section. What's the name of the section?
Is it Section 9?
No, how did we forget the name of the Star Trek espionage division, essentially? Section 31? Yes, Jesus.
There you go. Yeah, and
I'm kind of leaning into that.
Right away after the episode, I started looking it up, and a lot of people were like saying the officer that was in charge of Rutherford had to be a part of Section 31.
And maybe Rutherford himself was a part of Section 31.
Yeah, because you got to remember, Rutherford was... They kind of alluded throughout the episode that prior to the accident, Rutherford was a brilliant engineer.
He was a bit of a doucher.
He was a doucher, but he was willing to take risks.
Yeah.
Like crazy. But it worked until that accident. And then you kind of get the illusion that basically like the Federation officers that were there during his operation were like trying to cover something up.
Yeah. I've always liked conspiracy aspects to any show. It's one of the reasons why one of my favorite shows to this day, the most obvious, is X-Files. And then there's the copycat X-Files that I thought was actually equally good in its own right. And that was, do you remember Dark Skies from the mid-90s?
Yeah.
How they reworked history to, in a way that justified their story, that was trying to say that at the heart of every historical moment in American history, there was an alien conspiracy involved.
Yep.
That was really cool. So I've always been drawn to these types of conspiracies where you're not quite sure what's happening, and the only person that can tell you their minds were wiped.
Mm-hmm.
And Star Trek hasn't really delved into the conspiracy aspect too much. There was the first season of TNG, which did. And to this day, I have nightmares over that episode where you had.
Are you talking about the worms?
Yeah, you had these little. Remember these little parasites?
Yeah, it was a parasite.
Yeah, and I felt like that's kind of what they were paralleling in this episode when they had Boimler and Mariner poke fun of the conspiracy truthers. Now, obviously, that's also a jab at today's, social environment where no one believes in anything. Everything's a lie. We have the flat earthers. We have the
news.
Yeah, the whole fake news. So obviously that was a jab at that. But then also you have our very own conspiracy in TNG that was in the first season. What was the name of the episode? Was titled Conspiracy, actually.
Yeah.
It was the 25th and penultimate episode of the first season of course, Star Trek: The Next Generation. It aired in 1988. Man, that's so long.
It does. That was a long time. But like that episode still sticks with me, especially in the very end.
That ending when the villain dies.
Yeah, and his head explodes.
Dude, going back to what we were talking about at the top of the show with the conworm. Certainly, you could say the visual effects are a bit dated, but it is still effective.
Oh, and the imagery still sticks with me to this day.
People don't bring this up when they talk about nightmare imagery from Star Trek. They bring up the transporter accident from the motion picture, which I do agree with that.
Yes,
they bring up the conworm, which definitely agree with that. But seldom do people bring up this forgotten episode where we got some of the most disturbing imagery ever in Star Trek.
Because you found out the parasite infected everybody in the Starfleet hierarchy.
Yeah.
And then like at the very end, I think it was Picard and Riker, and they're the ones who shot the worm and blew the guy's head off.
Yeah, and they had, leading up to this episode, there were other episodes that were already building into this bigger story. Now, I don't know why they ended up canning this idea, because it felt like it was going to be around for the long haul. In fact, it was an original idea conceived by Gene Roddenberry.
Oh, yeah.
So I want to do a special show once we get out of the thick of all these new episodes of Star Trek we have to cover. I want to do a discussion for our Patreon listeners, Dave, where we delve into all of the ins and outs of conspiracy, including why they ended up veering away from that storyline and what they were trying to do. Because I do have a lot of articles saved. Anytime they pop up over the last couple years, I save them into a document so I can go back to them when I need to reference them. and a lot of them have to do with conspiracy. So
Oh,
I'm gonna probably do some research and do some studying, and then we'll put together a show on that because
Well, dude, there's so many in Star Trek. I mean, even Deep Space Nine, the whole Bashir story. Bashir story.
But
was
is that would you consider that a conspiracy story?
kind of because they were trying to cover it up. The Federation tried. Remember, Bashir said he had to keep his secret.
Yeah, but
about
that was
everything.
more of a social. I would say more of a social discussion. You know, dealing with prejudice. I wouldn't say it was a conspiracy story necessarily. I would even say Section 31 was a conspiracy story. It was more of an espionage story.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a
Yeah.
good point. To me, the biggest thing that stuck out to me with that one was the fact that the Federation knew about the genetic engineering,
Yeah.
and they didn't say anything.
Yeah. So, of course, it isn't an episode of Lower Decks without some big references. For example, the moment when Rutherford told Tendi about his problems sleeping and his dreams, which then led Tendi to ask if it was like going to a new timeline with Kirk and Spock where they have cinematic chemistry.
Chemistry.
I like that because obviously that was a reference to the Kelvin timeline.
Yes, it was.
Which was fun. Because Kelvin Timeline is the red-headed stepchild of Star Trek. It used to be Deep Space Nine. Now the hated stepchild is Picard, probably at this
Yes.
point to a lot of Star Trek fans.
But dude, I mean, it's dialogue like that. That this is the first episode where I even say like the dialogue with the jokes started hitting, where it's like, remember me and you have been.
I felt like this episode felt more on par with the comedic, timing and pacing of the prior two seasons.
Yes, because like remember up to this point, me and you were like going, the episodes have been good, but it just seems like they've almost borderline. The jokes have been falling flat. This is the first episode where you can see the sharp wit that McMahon has.
Right.
Where he does that quick dialogue of the Spock thing, and that brings a chuckle to me because like suddenly, you know, like even as a mass audience, you're like left wondering what the heck, what did they say? And then that's how you do the comedic timing.
Yeah.
With that, it's not about just basically you say that and then you wait for the audience to catch up and treat it like a quote unquote Easter egg.
Yeah. And then they also brought in the Delta Flyer, essentially.
That was cool.
It was cool. Although I like how the douchey Rutherford kind of made fun of the Delta Flyer because some of the things he said were some of the things that I have said about the Delta Flyer. I'm like, why? But why?
But Mike, the Delta Flyer is awesome.
I understand. It was less about the practicality of the vessel, and it was more about developing Tom Paris as a character.
I was about to say it's Tom Paris, Mike.
That's what it was about, and that's why it was always been okay with me. Even though the Delta Flyer, in so many ways, just doesn't make sense. Like some of the things they have in there, it's all designed like a drag racing car. I'm like, that doesn't even make sense in a spacecraft.
It doesn't make sense, but it worked. It worked.
But it works because it was less about being. I really don't know how to say it. It was more about Paris as a character and fleshing him out, and that is why I always looked the other way. I said, okay, you know what? The point of this is about Tom Paris.
Yeah, and it's about basically showing the legacy of those characters and showing that basically, hey, those things that
The Delta Flyer
made those characters important and cool, other characters will know about it, and everyone. The thing I do like about Lower Decks is like they have a way of making like the really mundane things we thought about in past, you know, Star Trek series and made them important, you know, like the whole thing with Tom Paris, and the stuff with O'Brien, and I think it was season 1. And they
where they alluded to the fact that he did something so great that he has a statue of himself.
He has a statue of himself. and stuff like that basically makes the Lower Decks special to Star Trek because they're saying, yeah, those little things are really a cool nod. And of course, as a Star Trek fan, you're like going, man, the Delta Flyer would have worked perfectly in Picard.
It does bring up a question, though, David, with everything Voyager brought back with them, like all of that high technology that they had made a part of the Voyager craft, right?
Yes.
The starship, you know, using all the Borg components and all the other things. Like,
Voyager was the shit.
How come we never, like, in all actuality, wouldn't Starfleet reverse engineer some of these things and use them? And yet
You gotta
we don't
remember,
really.
They
Well-
do delve in that in Prodigy. They do.
A bit. Yeah.
Because you find out that basically the
star drive. or
the
something.
star drive
Yeah.
was actually what was actually created because of the Voyager class.
Yeah. Well, and
But-
again, and also, I guess Picard is really the only show we've been given in live action that that has explored the time post Voyager.
Post-Voyager.
So I suppose there hasn't been an opportunity to explore. Although even in Discovery in the future, you got to think that. I don't know.
Oh, sure.
Maybe
Even-
I'm just asking for stupid things, but wouldn't it make sense for there to be a jump in technology for the Federation because of the Borg tech?
You'd think,
Yeah.
because especially since like the thing that I've been pointing out for Kurtzman's era of Star Trek, it's cool what they're actually been bringing to the table, and they're pushing the technology forward, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They've introduced some amazing concepts. Like I think the Spore Drive was actually freaking phenomenal.
Yeah, I love it.
I love the Spore Drive. And then when you get to Prodigy and you get to the Star Drive,
I think that's what it was called,
I think
right?
it's
Star Drive?
it's either Nova Drive or the Star Drive. But then for me as a Star Trek fan, it's like you're left after seeing those and saying, "Wait a minute, where is all that stuff
Yeah.
during this period?"
Well,
unless
listen.
it was lost.
Well, we also know that Michael Chabon doesn't know anything of Star Trek outside of a couple episodes of Next
Yeah.
Generation, so that's probably why he didn't
Probably why.
utilize it, and why 7 of 9 was not 7 of 9 in the first season of Picard. She was Sarah Connor.
She was Sarah Connor.
I mean, you realize 7 of 9 was a scientist,
was.
right?
She was.
She was a scientist.
She was a scientist.
She was capable of fighting, but that wasn't her default mode. Suddenly, she's an assassin and the ultra, feminine fighter of Star Trek. Fucking stupid.
See, the funny part is you can look at 7 of 9, her story in Picard, and look at Rutherford. He had that douchey side in the very beginning.
Not the same, David.
But then, he turned into the Federation, and now you have 7 of 9. Sarah Connor, she's turned back into the one that we all love.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll go with that. All right. There was also a few newer elements introduced into this episode, and I'm glad the whole thing wasn't. They have to continue to build out their world, their own world as well. And I have said as much over the last couple episodes. Like, give us something new as well. Don't always fill out the entire narrative of your episodes with things that have already been established because of purposes of fan service or nostalgia. And Petra Aberdeen was thankfully not another Easter egg. She was a new character. Her first appearance was in the episode of Lower Decks. We've never seen her before.
Yeah.
But it does feel like they're alluding to something else as well because they put so much emphasis on her. Doesn't it feel like she might play a part later in the show?
Absolutely, especially with Mariner's story.
Yeah.
The thing I like that I'm starting to see is, especially after this episode, is a more of a focus on what is the story of Mariner for this ongoing series. We had the whole thing about her life as turning it from as a Federation officer to basically a story of her relationship with her mom. Now, me and you, like especially we mentioned in the last episode, what the heck is Mariner's next step? What's her next growth?
Right.
And after this episode, it really feels like Mariner is at that point where she's like going, is she happy with her Federation life like right now? Which she apparently is. Or is the old Mariner, does she miss that old life where she's like, carefree, doesn't have many responsibilities?
I think she does, obviously. I think that's the point, right? That
Yes.
she's trying to be a better Starfleet officer,
She's trying
but
to be a better
her
Starfleet
personality
officer.
and her character flaws are getting the best of her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, yeah, this Petra Aberdeen was interesting. They said that she had served as a Starfleet officer at one point on the USS Victory, which comes with some pretty big history when it comes to the TNG era of Star Trek. Geordie LaForge and Susanna Leachin, I want to say is how you say her last name, were assigned to this ship in the early 2360s in the episode titled Identity Crisis. So we have seen the USS Victory in live action before. Yes. So that's much appreciated, giving us something new while also intertwining it with something that has already been established in the Star Trek canon. Starbase 80.
That one was interesting.
That's a new concept as well.
Yes.
And it seems like it's just going to be one of those things that is a part of Lower Decks that they're trying to make their own. It felt a lot like remember that episode where we saw the Enochian, like
Yes. I know what you're
like
talking
doctor,
about.
where all of the abnormalities that happened
went
throughout
to.
the decades of Federation history would go to this planet.
Yes.
It kind of felt like that. That's what Starbase 80 felt like. It
But
felt like
something
another
even-
one of those.
Even worse, because like this was the first time you actually saw Mariner worried.
Well, yeah,
Like-
because it has a less than desirable reputation, according to this wiki here, among the crew of the USS Cerritos, to the point that many crew members cried out in shock when Dr. T'Ana suggested that Ensign Beckett Mariner go work on the Starbase.
80.
Yeah. So I'm interested to see what these places are. I want to go back to that planet where all the abnormalities go, and then I also would like to see Starbase 80 now.
Yes.
I think-
Because the thing that's going to be interesting is how are they going to use Starbase 80? Because it just seems like Ransom's going to use that as a threat from here on out. So if it's an ongoing threat, yeah, but I do agree with you. Like if he continues to use it as a threat, we should be able to see it.
As long, but for the impact to be even greater and for us to really pique our intrigue, or for it to really pique our intrigue even more so, it has to be an ongoing gag.
Yes.
It has to be. They have to keep. I'm talking maybe for even a season and a half, maybe even more, and then finally we see why it's so hated, and it should be so fucking funny. I'm talking. This is where you bring in nostalgia. Whoever runs Starbase 80 should be like one of the characters from past Star Trek that maybe runs Starbase 80, and he's
It's
just
Ensign
very.
Kim.
He's perfect, David, because he's really boring. It's just no one wants to be around him because he just sucks. He has no personality, and his monotone and his weird 5-year-old way he walks like a toddler
And
on his tippy toes.
And his first officer is Jake.
Oh,
So
perfect.
it's- so it's Kim and Jake.
David, that's actually, you just described my hell. Like, that is my hell. Like, if I go to hell, you know how they say everyone has a different hell? That would be my hell. I would be in a room with Ensign Kim and Jaco.
And Jaco.
All right, David, let's move into our final thoughts. Why don't you start us off and then give me your RMD score?
My final thoughts for this one.
Keep it brief.
I'm very happy with this episode. This is a definite uptick from the last episode. In doing so, this is the first episode I think scores in the 90 range for this season for me.
Okay.
So I gave this one a 90, a flat out 90,
Okay.
because I love the story of Rutherford. I like the story of Mariner and Boimler. And I'm sorry, when Boimler loses his shit in the very end and starts tearing people up, Mike, you don't understand. Boimler was basically us, and everybody else was the trolls that we hate on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And Boimler just basically destroys
had enough.
everybody. He
That
had
was a
enough.
metaphor for Alex Kurtzman.
Yes.
He's all, I'm tired of everyone telling me I suck.
And he's like telling people, like, if it wasn't for us, you would never exist. You'd be destroyed. And I was like cracking up. I'm like going, oh my God.
It was
I
good.
think Alex Kurtzman came into the writing room and basically just
Yeah,
vented.
can we break the fourth wall, please?
Yes.
And I promise that if we break the fourth wall, I'll also twerk.
I will twerk.
I hear that's the thing nowadays. They're doing it in Marvel shows. So stupid. All right, David, my score, 86%. Wait, that's not true. Hold on a second. Yeah, 86%, which is my second highest score of the year. It is a strong episode for
Yeah.
sure. And I do appreciate that they gave us an episode that focuses on the things that actually makes this show good. Because I feel like the last two episodes, 2, 3, and 4 were just
Yeah, they were
You know?
meandering.
Yeah, this episode felt more on par with what we had been given so far, or what we have been given so far, specifically in, of course, seasons 1 and 2. Okay, David, I do want to remind people before we close out today's show that we do have a Patreon page. If you want to help us stay on the air, we do need the support and assistance from our listeners, from our dedicated listeners. Go to patreon.com/Rayman Digital and pledge $3 to $5 a month. For $3, you gain all of our content on the behind the scenes tier. Basically, you gain access to a show that we do called the Unimatrix Zero, which is our companion show to our regular show here from the Holodeck, where we get into things that we don't always have time to get into during our regular broadcast. We also have a $5 tier where we do full podcast discussions on From the Holodeck, and we get into all types of additional bonus content. You name it, we do it. I'm not going to list all of it because if you can imagine it, we do it. for Patreon subscribers. Patreon.com/RaymanDigital Pledge. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Live long and prosper.